Chapter 31, Enlightenment. Puzzle solitary? That's worth it. Jiang Xunning's heart was beating wildly, and she almost didn't think about it, so she said, "Don't thank Mr. Lao. Since there is no doubt about the people who are not selected, Xuanning has no doubts. It's a presumptuous thing to disturb Mr. Xie still looked at her, really don't need to." Jiang Xuning hurriedly showed a reluctant smile, and stumbled, No, really don't need it." Xie withdrew his eyes lightly and said, "Since everyone has no doubts, today's examination school will end here. I only hope that a few young ladies who have no chance to accompany Her Royal Highness the eldest princess will continue to study and devote themselves to reading after returning home. Those who are fortunate enough to stay with Her Royal Highness the eldest princess to read can clean up after today and return to the house to prepare for 2 days, and then officially enter the palace to accompany the study. I and several gentlemen of the Hanlin Academy will arrange the next 6 months of schoolwork for Her Royal Highness the eldest princess and you in these days. From now on, you will be commensurate with our teachers and students. I hope you will not relax. Not only can you have this opportunity, but also after half a year." The secret sigh left by the uncaused. Those who stayed were all slightly heartbroken. The crowd bowed, "Yes, sir." Now they all withdrew from the temple. 12 people participated in the school examination, and 8 people were left in the end, led by Xiao Shu. They were Chen Shiyi, Yao Shi, Zhou Baoying, Fang Miao, Yu Yu, Yao Rongrong, Jiang Xuning. Except for Jiang Xuning, who had a sad face, everyone else was somewhat happy. Zhou Baoying's little girl was a child, and she couldn't help it when she was happy, and as soon as she walked out of the Fengchen Palace, she danced with her hands. "Oh my god, I've actually passed. And Mr. Xie is not as serious as Daddy said. Speak in a good voice. I thought it would be very bitter to enter the palace to read with you, isn't this pretty good? Blame Daddy for scaring me." Jiang Xuning said in her heart that it was when you hadn't seen him serious, and it was light to be scared to death. Fang Miao walked to Jiang Xunning's side very naturally, grabbed her arm affectionately, and looked at her as if she was looking at a benefactor. "Second Miss Jiang is really a good person. I wanted to hug you and kiss you when I saw the question paper sent down before, and I actually got all the books you asked me to read this morning. If it weren't for Second Miss Jiang's guidance, I would have been dethroned today." Yao Rongrong was also reluctant. Hearing Fang Miao's words, she also lowered her head and said timidly, "Yes, thank you so much Sister Jiang, it's like knowing what to take in advance and guessing too accurately." Everyone didn't feel anything when they heard Fang Miao's words, but when they heard Yao Rongrong's words, their hearts suddenly became subtle. Xiao Shu walked in front and suddenly glanced back at Yao Rongrong. Jiang Xunning's pupils also shrank slightly. For the first time, she seriously thought, is this Yao Rongrong really born unable to speak, or is it on purpose? She looked at Yao Rongrong, but the other party was still weak and cowardly, and she didn't even dare to raise her eyes very high, which made people feel cringe and pitiful. Fang Miao also frowned, and only said, "Why are you so unable to speak?" Yao Rongrong suddenly shrank again. Fang Miao couldn't say anything about her again, she couldn't spit it out in her chest for some reason, so she had to turn back to Jiang Xuning and say, "But Second Miss Jiang is also really powerful. Most of us are in contact with Mr. Xie so close for the first time, and you still have the courage to stand up and want to check the file with Mr. Xie. I was really scared to death at that time. I thought, what if Mr. Xie punishes you?" Jiang Xuning listened to the meaning of her words, and only thought that she had found a rare partner. "But I didn't expect that." Fang Miao's next sentence changed sharply, and said with a smile, "As a result, Mr. Xie is really good-tempered, he didn't mean to pursue you at all, and he was just kind and pleasant, and he actually said that he wanted to solve your doubts alone. He was really a humble gentleman. We are so lucky to meet such a gentleman. Zhang Xuning. All the words that I didn't have time to say were blocked in my throat. Chen Shiyi, who had rarely spoken before, also rarely expressed her approval, and softly echoed, "My father said that Mr. Xie can't find fault with his life, but he is never sloppy in his studies. After entering the palace, I only need to take my studies seriously. Presumably Mr. Xie will never intentionally embarrass anyone, he is an excellent gentleman," and said, "If I can learn a little fur, it will not be in vain to enter the palace." Listening to her words, Zhang Xuning suddenly realized a dilemma that she had never expected before, that is, Xie Wei at this moment had nothing to do with the word anti-thief at all, neither exposing his decisive side of killing, nor showing his fangs of hatred to the Xiao family and the royal family. In the eyes of all he was an impachable wise man, a virtuous saint, and only himself, who single-mindedly thought he was a bad person, so no one could understand how guarded, jealous, and even fearful she was of Xie Wei. On that day, under the sky, the scene where Xie Wei promised the assassin to never hurt your life is still vivid. But as soon as the assassin showed his head, the arrow pierced through his head without mercy. And Xie Wei was calm about this, as if he hadn't made any previous promises to the assassins. Such a scheming and deceitful person, when he already had some suspicions about her, would soon become her husband. The palace is an environment where she is to blame at every turn. How can she get out of this dead end? Just thinking about it, Zhang Xuning felt chills all over. As she walked, her steps stopped. Fang Miao and the others were talking to each other about what they should prepare after leaving the palace this time and re-entering the palace, and they were about to ask Zhang Xuning what fun she would bring, but when they turned around and found that there was no one, they were immediately surprised. Second Miss Zhang. Zhang Xuning stood motionless under the high palace wall. Fang Miao took a closer look, only to find that her expression on her face had changed, as if she was in the midst of a battle between heaven and man, and she wanted to make a very difficult decision, and couldn't help but be startled. "Are you okay?" Zhang Xuning pursed her lips, suddenly raised her head and said, "I'm going back to find Mr. Xie." Fang Miao's eyes widened, "Go back to Mr. Xie?" Zhang Xuning held her hand and said solemnly, "If I haven't returned to Yangzizai after 2 moments, please ask Miss Fang to come to Fengchen Hall to save me." Fang Miao was simply confused, and just wanted to say, "If you go back to Mr. Xie, what danger do you need me to rescue?" But after Zhang Xuning finished telling this, she had already let go of her hand directly, and turned around resolutely, lifted the corner of her skirt and walked back quickly. After a while, he bypassed the palace wall and entered the Fengchen Palace. Xie Wei was rolling up the answer sheet on the case at this time, and after saying a few words to the other 3 gentlemen, he was about to go to the side hall, but as soon as he looked up, he saw the figure that reappeared in front of the temple door. Several gentlemen also saw it, and couldn't help but be stunned, and glanced at Xie Wei hesitantly. "Young Master Xie." Xie Wei didn't expect Zhang Xuning to dare to go and return. He smiled at the others and said, "I'll stay and deal with it. A few elders will leave first, and when I arrive at the Hanlin Academy tomorrow, it's not too late for me to discuss the content of the lecture." Several gentlemen didn't want to meddle in the matter of teaching the princess to read, and they hadn't read Zhang Xunning's answer sheet. They just thought that this female student was going to be upset about which dethroned companion, and it was too late to hide, so they all said goodbye and went out of the palace. Xie Wei waved his hand, and the palace people also retreated. There were still many people in the Fengchen Hall before, and it was suddenly deserted. Xie Wei's figure in a Taoist robe showed a bit of unearthly clarity in the half-bright and half-dark light of the hall, and his face was calm, and he only said, I'm afraid what Miss Ning wants to ask is not someone else's answer sheet, but her own answer sheet, right? Zhang Xuning has been afraid for a long time, but there is an evil fire in her heart. The matter of entering the palace was unexpected by her from the beginning. First, Yan Lin intervened horizontally and forced Shen Zai to submit her name, and then Shen Zai went to settle the Ministry of Rights, so that she was selected to be promoted to the palace to study, and also explained that the female officials in the palace were not embarrassed by her. When she arrived at Xie, she thought there should be a turnaround. After all, this person is famous for his academic rigor, not to mention anything else. But I never expected that when she handed in such an unlearned and deviant answer sheet, Xie let her pass as if she was blind. Where is the ethics of the school surnamed Xie? The experience of this life gradually coincided with the previous life, and the anger that she faintly felt that she couldn't change anything gradually overwhelmed her fear of Xie, and also made her have a little courage to question in this extreme predicament. At that moment, Zhang Xuning stood in the hall, did not take a step back, almost in a posture of forced questioning, and said coldly, "The world is grateful to Mr. for the legacy of the saint, rigorous in his studies, and in addition to the Aegean, he loves books. But today, Xuanning knows that her knowledge is shallow, and the answer sheet is just a nonsense writing. How can I leave with a better answer than me, and I'm a mess, but I can stay." Xie smiled faintly, second Miss Ning is no longer pretending. Zhang Xuning didn't speak. Xie only picked up her answer sheet from the pile of answer sheets on the desk, put it on his fingertips, and shook it before he read. Zi said, "Born with virtue in giving, what is Huanwei like giving?" Ning Er's girl wrote on the answer sheet that sage Confucius has no connection with virtue and Huanwei. Huanwei can't kill Sage Kong, it's Huanwei's waste, and he can't cut down trees without cutting people. Sage Kong can escape, because Sage Confucius and his disciples see the opportunity quickly and run fast. This is a thing that has nothing to do with virtue and can't be argued. He also wrote, who said that Huanwei could not be like the sage of Confucius. Killing his head, cracking the car, and branding the cannon, there are ways to cure him. Or wash and sprinkle salt with sage Confucius, put it in a steamer, and let it be soft and rotten, or pickle sage Confucius, put it in an oil pan, and fry it until golden. He has an extremely nice voice. It's just that the better it sounds, the more chills run down the back of one's head when he calmly pronounces these words. Zhang Xuning suddenly felt that the little bit of courage to die that had just emerged began to fade in her body. Xie had never taught such a tricky student, and after reading it, he raised his head and looked at her. "I have been reading the books of sages for many years, but I don't know that Sage Kong has such 18 practices. Why didn't Miss Ning even write it down to eat it raw? I didn't necessarily learn any truth from reading, but I actually had a lot of experience in cooking. This is clearly a bit of a mockery." Zhang Xuning was not happy to hear it, and subconsciously retorted, "The way of cooking, in front of Mr. Xie, where do you dare to do it dash?" The word axe was stuck in her throat, and she suddenly felt a chill rushing up from under her feet, crawling down her spine directly to the back of her neck, making her shiver all at once. Broken. This is something that shouldn't be mentioned. Xie pinched the slender fingers of the answer sheet, and there was a moment of tightness, and the curved lines seemed to be filled with some kind of imminent undercurrent. However, it only took a moment to relax. He slowly put the answer sheet back flat, only curled the corners of his lips slightly, and said softly, "I thought that 4 years ago, Miss Ning forgot about it, but I didn't expect it, but I still remembered it." Zhang Xuning was trembling all over her body and wanted to run, but reason controlled her, making her feet nailed to the ground, unable to move, and forced her to calm down. "It's Xuanning's rudeness, nonsense for a while, I hope Mr. forgive me. Xuanning came today, and really just wanted to ask about the answer, and asked Mr. Xie to explain the reason. Xie Wei said very politely, "Second, Miss Ning's answer sheet does look different from ordinary people, and her ideas are quite out of the box and imaginative. If you let other gentlemen see it, you can't let the second girl pass." But Xie was not talented, but found that Ning Er had also read a lot of books. The sentence "Piff sees humiliation" is from Leaving the Marquis, and "Piff is angry and blood splashes 5 steps" is from Warring States Policy. Ordinary girls in the boudoir don't read such books. Dare to say that Sage Kong is talking nonsense. It turns out that Ning Er's ability to talk nonsense is not low. Jiang Xunning's heart was half cold. Xie Wei re-rolled the answer sheet and said, "Although it is said that rotten wood cannot be carved, Xie is a teacher, and he has to carve it to know if there is a piece of gold and jade hidden in it. What does Miss Ning think?" After Jiang Xuning became the queen in the last life, especially during the period when she fought with Xiao Shu, she did read a lot of books seriously, but she was afraid that she would not be able to calculate her plan and be pulled down from the queen's throne. "Even when I was in the palace, I never worked so hard to read." People are accustomed to what they know, and they do not feel that there is any difference in some of the words that are often on their lips, and they will use them as an argument to refute the words of the saints without any defense. As everyone knows, as Xie Wei said, who in the ordinary daughter's family reads this? Her eyes flickered for a moment, racking her brains to find a suitable excuse for herself. But he didn't want Xie Wei to take the answer sheet and walk down from the hall. When he arrived at her, his footsteps stopped slightly, and he said, "Are you thinking now, what kind of reason do you have to find to persuade Xie to not let you pass this answer sheet, so that you can escape from reading and leave the palace and go home?" Jiang Xuning saw him approaching, and couldn't help but take a small step back. Xie Wei laughed suddenly, "If that's the case, there's really no need to waste any effort here in Xie. First, a few days ago, Ling Zun had asked Xie to take more care of Ning Er girl in the palace. Second, Yan Shiza came to Yang yesterday and I copied a question paper, and I also asked Xie to teach Ning Er girl. Third, as the ancients said, the grace of dripping water, the spring reciprocates." Jiang Xuning subconsciously raised her eyes to look at him. "It's that bad premonition again." Xie Wei's eyebrows were calm, wearing a green shirt, with a majestic mountain, and he only said, "It's been a few days since Miss Ning Er was selected to accompany the study, haven't you heard of it? In other words, your name has already been ticked from Xie. If he does not agree, anyone's name can be crossed off the list." These words fell like thunder, and instantly blew Jiang Xuning up. There is actually a copy of Xie Wei. So the previous question of "who wants me to enter the palace" was completely answered, which made her have a realization that was almost collapsed. It turned out that it was not "who wants to me," but "whoever wants to me." Jiang Xunning's whole head became a mess for a while. She wanted to curse. Xie Wei looked at her quietly, a little deep thought flashed in his eyes, and he suddenly smiled. "You are so reluctant to enter the palace to accompany you, are you afraid that I will kill you?" Chapter 32, There is light in the cracks. Autumn is in full swing, and even at noon, when the sun is shining, it can't reduce the biting chill in the wind. Xie Wei stood at the door of the temple. He was quite tall, just blocking the light that came in from outside the hall gate, covering Jiang Xunning's slightly slender figure in his shadow, and at this moment, her eyes widened, and she couldn't tell what kind of expression Xie Wei was in the blur of the backlight. "Afraid? Afraid? I'm scared, I'm scared." At this moment, Jiang Xuning suddenly felt so tired, and all the strength in her body seemed to be stripped away, and finally stopped hiding it completely, and said with a wink, "I am just a young lady of the boudoir, I have neither power nor ambition in the court, and even except for my father, I have no intersection with Mr. Xie. As far as Mr. Tse is concerned, I am a little ant that Mr. Tse can pinch to death with a little trick, and I cannot pose any threat to Mr. Tse. If I say I'm scared, but I don't mean to denounce or harm Mr. from the beginning to the end, will you believe me? Xie Wei was silent for a long time, and asked her, if you were me, would you dare to believe it? It's not whether you want to, but whether you dare. Jiang Xuning lowered her head gently, a slender and white neck, as white as snow even in the dark shadows. At this time, I really put myself in their shoes. If she had been in danger for a while, who had planned for her own at least 4 years ago, but because she was sick or in a desperate situation, she was irrational for a moment, and said something shocking to the only person around her at the time, but then escaped alive, would she believe that this person could always keep her mouth shut and not reveal the secret to any stakeholders? Jiang Xuning's eyelashes fluttered, although she was reluctant in her heart, she had to admit it, and said slowly, I don't dare to believe it. Although that threat may be just a little bit of dust. But the embankment of 1,000 miles was destroyed in the anthill, who knows that he will not fall short because of this in the future. Believing in her and letting her go is tantamount to putting all your plans and even your own head in danger, and you have to worry at all times, will this person seize the opportunity to calculate me, and when will he stab me in the back? Thinking about this, Jiang Xuning was sure that she would definitely die. The pain of the dagger in her previous life when it slashed across her neck came out almost at the same time as she had this realization, making her hands folded in front of her tremble uncontrollably. But at this moment, she didn't want to show fear. She clenched her fingers hard. Xie Wei asked her again, second Miss Ning thinks that after 4 years, one day, I found out that the little girl who knew my secret was not as naive and ignorant as I thought, what should I speculate? Jiang Xuning said, she pretended to be crazy and stupid, trying to save her life. Xie Wei's gaze fell on her overly hard palm, so, if you are me, what if this person is removed? Jiang Xuning closed her eyes slightly, but sir, I don't want to die. Xie Wei fell silent again. During this period of time, it was suddenly stretched infinitely, and in the extreme tightness, Jiang Xuning felt like a lamb staying by the guillotine, not knowing when it would be placed on the sharp blade. Xie Wei stared at her for a long time, as if he was thinking about something. In the end, he stretched out his hand to her and said slowly, you are not my threat, the real threat is that I dare not believe you, but I want to believe you. Second Miss Ning, Xie Wei is not a person who does not remember his gratitude, but what you showed is not what I expected. I need to see what kind of person you are and whether you are worthy of my risky trust. I don't want to get rid of my savior, so I ask you to stay under my nose for half a year. As he spoke, his slender fingers caressing the top of her head. Jiang Xuning was stunned. Xie Wei only said, although you don't want to stay in the palace, this is the only way I can convince myself that I cannot kill you immediately. Please bury the events of 4 years ago in your heart and become a secret that will always be the only one you and I know. Don't push me, and don't make me angry anymore. With that, he withdrew his hand, turned and walked out of the temple. From the dark to the light. The light of the sky outside finally illuminated his entire figure, and the pale blue Taoist robe was fluttering, walking under the vermilion palace wall, and gradually disappeared. Asterisk. When she returned to Yang's his eye, Jiang Xuning's whole person was like a water ghost who had just been fished out, her steps were vain, and her face was pale. Fang Miao was sitting under the porch, pinching her fingers to calculate how long it had been, thinking about whether she should save this Zhang Er girl if 2 moments had really passed. It always feels like a joke. As a result, when he turned his head and saw Jiang Xuning coming back like this, he was so shocked that he stood up directly, "Second Miss Zhang, what's wrong with you?" It was only then that she realized that what Zhang Xuning said earlier might not be a joke. Kin. But who in the government and the opposition doesn't know what kind of person Xie Wei is to get along with? What is the second girl Zhang going to argue about, so that she can be scared like this by Mr. Xie, who has the temper of a saint? Zhang Xuning did not answer. She went straight into her room, turned back and closed the door, and then slowly slid down with her back against the door, covering her face with her hands on her bent knees. Only then can you hear your own heartbeat and breathing clearly. She's alive. In the small window to the north, the sun shines through the snow-white window paper, and the fine dust floats in the air, like shining points of light swimming in the water. Zhang Xuning raised her head and stared at the dust for a long time. Then he burst out laughing heartily and laughing at himself. Xie Wei actually said that he didn't want to kill her. Should she believe such a deceitful person? But now she is neither a queen, nor does she hold any authority in her hands, but a boudoir woman was killed by mountain bandits when she went out, and she was afraid that she couldn't make much splash, and those who wanted to cover it had thousands of means to cover it up. Is it necessary for jackals to deceive ants? Nope. Then why did Xie Wei in the previous life say such terrible things to her? This madman thinks it's funny to scare her? Or, Xie Wei's change in attitude is because of the change in her life. It's been less than a month since she was reborn, and there's very little she can do. Really, there is only one thing. That is, when he didn't enjoy Yan Lin's kindness to him as a matter of course, he began to plan to hook up with Shenju. If this is indeed the reason for Xie Wei's difference in his attitude towards his two lives, and Yan Lin hasn't even gone to Xie Wei at this time, then she can believe that the secrets of the previous dynasty that Yu Fangyan confided to her in the previous life 20 years ago are 80% true. It is not surprising that Xie Wei would slaughter the royal family and the Xiao family. Even extenuating. At this moment, Zhang Xuning actually felt that this person was really a little pitiful. But when she thinks about it, she is a mud bodhisattva who crosses the river and cannot protect herself. Where does she have the qualifications to pity a superior person who is holding her own life in her hand? Half a year. She slowly closed her eyes, recited the time in her mind, and finally exhaled slowly. There is no way to avoid it, it is better to see the move. Of course it's good to hide. But she really couldn't hide, and she didn't want to be killed. If Xie Wei's previous words are true, then it is naturally the best, and she can be at ease when she leaves the palace after half a year. If Xie Wei is deceitful and her words are just to lie to her, then staying in the palace for half a year is the safest choice she can make. No matter how you act, you always have to be a little scrupulous in the palace. Take 10,000 steps back, the worst situation for her is to repeat the old path of the previous life, go out and continue to hook up with Shenju, become the queen and then slowly engage with Xie Wei. After figuring out what she was going to do next, Zhang Xuning sat in place for a while, and finally felt some strength in her legs, so she stood up again, washed herself, sobered up, and then packed her bags a little and prepared to leave the palace. These 3 days into the palace are just to learn the rules plus to be re-elected. The real companion reading is 2 days later, and the person who is finally selected goes home to say goodbye to his parents and packs up a little, and then enters the palace again, imitating the officials of the DPRK and China to implement the system of resting and bathing, and after entering the palace to accompany the princess, he can go home for 1 day every 10 days. After the results of the academic examination came out, Shenzai, the eldest princess of Liang, sent a lot of rewards, both selected and unselected, but the selected people added an extra set of 4 treasures of the study. Before Zhang Xuning left the palace with everyone, she also came to send it in person. Took Xiao Shu's hand and said for a while, and then held her hand and said for a while, and then let Huang Renli, the eunuch in charge next to her, take a group of palace people and lead them out of the palace. Asterisk. The carriage sent by the Zhang mansion to pick up people was already waiting outside the palace gate. Lianer Tanger stood beside the carriage, saw her coming out of the palace gate from a distance, and waved to her happily. Zhang Xuning said goodbye to the others and got into the carriage. Tanger saw that she seemed to be a little tired, so she hurriedly put the pillow in the car, helped her sit down, and looked at her with some worry. The girl is tired these days, right? It's true that Zhang Xuning is tired, and it's true that I'm afraid. At the moment, he only slowly closed his eyes, and after thinking about it, he said, after returning to the house for a while, I will sleep first, and you will send someone to the Yanji Marquis mansion to deliver the message, and ask Yan Shiza to see you on the floor tomorrow. I have something to tell him. You must know that in the past, when the second girl played with Yan Shiza, most of the time Yan Shiza came to the door, so gradually even these maids got used to seeing Yan Shiza's big llama appear on the courtyard wall of Jiang's mansion from time to time, or on the girl's window. It is very rare for the second girl to take the initiative to ask Yan Shiza to come out. Tanger listened to Zhang Xunning's calm voice, but for some reason she suddenly felt a little frightened, but she didn't dare to ask more, so she answered softly. Zhang Xuning closed her eyes and took a nap. The carriage left all the way outside the palace gate. It's just that he hasn't walked far away, and a lowered voice suddenly sounded outside, "Second girl, second girl." Zhang Xuning felt as if she had heard this voice somewhere. She opened her eyes. When the coachman who was driving the car outside saw someone, he had stopped in time, turned his head and reported to the car curtain, "Second girl, it's a girl, it seems to be looking for you." Zhang Xuning waved her hand, let Lianer lift the corner of the car curtain, and looked outside. It turned out to be Yu Fangyan. She is wearing a crescent white dress today, but she doesn't look very new. His hair was in a bun, but he didn't wear any head. A face that can only be regarded as delicate, full of apprehension and nervousness. Both hands are in the sleeves, as if they are pinching something, but they can't see clearly through the sleeve robe. Her nervousness seemed to be caused by this. But when she crossed the curtain of the car and saw Zhang Xuning sitting in the car, her eyes lit up a little, and even the reddish tear mole in the corner of her eye seemed to be full of light. Zhang Xuning was stunned by the sudden flash of brightness and vividness on this dull face, and she didn't react for a while, and looked at her for a while. It was only for a moment that Yu Fangyan became nervous again. The previous glimmer of brightness quickly subsided, and was replaced by her original cowardice and fear. She stumbled and said, I. Zhang Xuning sighed when she saw it and said, "Get in the car and talk about it." Seeing her look like this, she couldn't be clear for a while, and she couldn't be told to stand outside the car all the time. The coachman moved the footstool, stepped aside, and let Yu Fangyan help the wheel to get into the car. Zhang Xuning let her sit opposite her, and only said, "What are you looking for me?" After Yu Fangyan sat down, she was a little at a loss, her body was tense, she didn't know what to say. After thinking about it for a long time, she looked at her twice. It seemed that she took a deep breath, mustered up her courage, and took out the things she hid in her sleeve. It turned out to be a simple square box. Flattened, it doesn't seem to hold much, and it's easy to see sour pear wood, which is not valuable. She held it with both hands, handed it to Zhang Xuning, and said expectantly, "Yes, I want to give this to the second girl." Zhang Xuning guessed that she probably saved her life, and she bought something to repay her, right? But she didn't ask for anything in return. Didn't reach out to pick it up at the moment, only softened his voice and said to her, Your situation in the mansion is not good, if there is anything in your hands first. I just want to repay it, and wait for my situation to get better. No, it's not. Yu Fangyan knew that she had misunderstood after listening to her words, and she had a basket of words in her head that she wanted to say, but she was stupid, and she couldn't say a complete sentence when she was stunned in her throat, and she was extremely nervous in front of Jiang Xuning, so she became more and more clumsy. She could only put this box in Jiang Xuning's hands. This must be given to the second girl, it's all yours. Her? Jiang Xuning really didn't remember what she gave her, seeing that she was so persistent, she was a little moved by her persistent and clumsy appearance, smiled, and said, then I'll take a look. She lifted her hand and opened the box. In the next moment, he was completely stunned. In this simple box, lying was a thin pile of silver tickets, and next to it was a moon-white sachet with exquisite embroidery. The silver horn is the largest silver horn in Beijing today. Each silver ticket is 100 taels. Jiang Xuning's fingers trembled slightly, and when she picked it up slightly, there were as many as 2,500 taels. How can a little Bafa girl come up with so much money? The moment she saw these silver tickets, she suddenly understood something, her eyes were slightly hot, and she almost wanted to cry. But she still looked up and asked her, where did you get all this money? Yu Fangyan blinked, as if she didn't understand why she asked, didn't the girl teach me? I took the money and went to the Jiangsu and Zhejiang Chamber of Commerce to find a businessman named Su Wenyi to buy raw silk, and then waited for the price to rise in half a month before selling it. I bought 400 taels of silk. And she did. Jiang Xuning almost choked. But looking at these silver tickets, she still calculated, and only said, 400 taels of silver, 3 times the earnings, not more than 1,200 taels, you can even hold the capital of 1,600 taels in your hand, how can there be 2,500 taels? Yu Fangyan said honestly, I only made 1,200 taels by selling, but after selling the silk, Boss Su said that he wanted to add 2,000 taels to me anyway, but I couldn't resist it, and after persuading him for a long time, he agreed to only add 900 taels. Jiang Xuning was puzzled, Boss Su gave you money. Yu Fangyan nodded like a chicken pecking rice, and as soon as he said this, his 2 eyes lit up, yes. My silk was sold, and Boss Su's silk was also sold, making a lot of money. When the silkworm farmers in his hometown learned about this, they were also very happy, and asked Boss Su to tell me that if Fangyan still wants to continue to do raw silk business next year, he can give me some good goods at that time, and tell me to only pay half of the deposit and sell them first. Su Wenyi's silk was sold. Jiang Xuning's eyelids jumped, he knows that the price of silk will rise. Yu Fangyan only saw that her expression seemed to have changed, her eyes that lit up just now were a little constricted, and her voice was much quieter, and she whispered, when he asked me, I told him. But don't worry, I didn't mention your identity, Boss Su asked me who you are, and I didn't say a word. Jiang Xuning held the silver ticket in her hand, and couldn't believe what she had heard. First, Yu Fangyan in the previous life only made 3 times as much money in this raw silk transaction, but now this Yu Fangyan took out 400 taels and took back 2,500 taels. Second, this stupid girl just made a fortune by herself, and even told Su Wenyi the news. She looked at her with complicated eyes, how dare you tell him? Yu Fangyan's face turned pale, his 2 hands were tightly clasped together, and he opened his mouth, but, Boss Su is a good person. Good? Jiang Xuning has been a human being in 2 lives, except for Jiang Shat, he doesn't know how to write the word good person. She said, how do you know that he is a good man? If he is lustful, I am afraid that you will not be able to appear in front of me alive today." Yu Fangyan was frightened by her heavy words. She only looked at her for a long time, her eyes open, and there seemed to be 1,000 words in them. "But I couldn't say a word." Jiang Xuning sighed, "That's it." She made a gesture to hand the box back, thinking that nothing happened this time anyway, and only told her to be careful in the future. But without thinking about it, Yu Fangyan suddenly opened her mouth again, although her voice trembled a little because of fear, but in her eyes, there was an inexplicable firmness and persistence. "Second girl, I asked before I went to the Jiangsu and Zhejiang Guild Hall. Boss Su, his net worth and life are in this business, and the silkworm farmers in his hometown are still waiting for him to sell silk and get the money back. And my aunt told me that if a person has many friends to help him, and many people are willing to believe him, he should at least be a person who is not bad. If I don't tell him, what will he do? What will the silkworm farmers do? That's why I'm..." Jiang Xuning was stunned. The next moment, he laughed. However, smiling and smiling, I don't know why, a sour feeling welled up in my heart, and all the tears that I had suppressed and endured in my eyes fell down, and they rolled down, wetting the silver tickets in the box. "Silly girl!" Yu Fangyan saw her smile first, and her face brightened, thinking that she didn't pursue it, and even felt that she had done the right thing. But before she could be happy, Jiang Xuning cried again. She was so frightened that she panicked, and hurriedly raised her sleeves to wipe her tears. Don't cry, it's all to blame." Fang Yun knew that she was wrong, and she would never talk nonsense to others in the future. Jiang Xuning listened to her talk like this, and her tears became more and more unstoppable. Yu Fangyan cried and blamed herself. "The girl wants me to make money, it must be that Fangyan is not good enough, and she doesn't earn enough this time. Don't cry, next time I will study more seriously, and next time, I will definitely earn more for the girl. Lots and lots." "What a silly girl!" Jiang Xuning cried and wanted to laugh again. For a while, in the past and present life, thousands of feelings came up, but they turned into something deeper and heavier, and pressed it down, so that she finally stepped on the ground from the boundless mid-air. She choked uncontrollably. At that moment, he lowered his eyes and looked at the box of silver tickets, and raised his head again, as if to stop his tears, but there was still crying in his voice. "No, it's good, you've really done a good job. It's me. It's that I'm not good enough." Chapter 33, Good Wind Day. Jiang Xuning never denied that she was a very selfish person. Compared to the current Yu Fangyan, deep down in her heart, she had hoped that it was the familiar Yu Fangyan who came here. But there is a limit to this meanness. She couldn't sit back and watch this Yu Fangyan be harmed, and she couldn't imagine how she would become friends with another Yu Fangyan after letting all this happen, so she saved her, but she couldn't get used to her cowardice, and she couldn't get used to everything that was different from another Yu Fangyan. But why does this Yu Fangyan want to become another Yu Fangyan? She's just living her life. And although she saved her, she was not qualified to dictate her life, nor was she qualified to express disappointment in any of her choices. Not to mention, she really did what she was told, to buy raw silk, to learn to keep accounts, to get out of the back house that ordinary women dare not come out of, and then put her full of gratitude into this small box. Jiang Xuning calmed down after a while, looked at her and said, "What's next? Do you have any plans?" Yu Fangyan was a little relieved when she saw that she finally stopped crying. At this time, he was stunned for a moment, and thought about it. Make money, make more money, and make the second girl happy. It's a silly thing again. Jiang Xuning couldn't hold back her tears and laughed. She only felt that this Yu Fangyan was too reasonable, but after thinking about it, no matter what the reason was, it was not a bad thing to want to make more money. There is no better option for her now. However, there are problems that need to be solved before then. She remembered that when she was in the palace before, she had heard Shanju mention a sentence, saying that it was found that the silk boat on the Cao River had capsized, and it was the collusion of officials and businessmen to raise the price of silk and want to make a profit from it. Zhang Xuning said, "Before and after you sold the raw silk, did you hear any unusual news?" "Yes." Yu Fangyan nodded hurriedly, with a little fear in his expression, and said, "Just the day before yesterday, officers and soldiers came to many guild halls, and 6 or 7 big businessmen were arrested. I heard Boss Su say that they are all big businessmen who rank up in the business field, and several people have mentioned to him before that they want to buy him a boatload of raw silk at a low price. But he felt that the price was too low, and he didn't even have the money to go back to the villagers, so he didn't agree. I didn't expect that as soon as our silk was sold, something happened to them. I also heard that it seems to be because of some kind of price gouging. Boss Su and I were very scared, but no one came to arrest us after waiting for 2 days. But last night, a steward in our house was taken away, as if to say that which relative of his family knew him in the house of an official on the Cao River, and I don't know if he was implicated." Zhang Xuning listened to the first half of the paragraph, but when she heard Yu Fangyan say that a steward in Qingyuan Bafa was arrested, her scalp exploded. If it is a big case like the collusion of officials and businessmen to deliberately capsize the boat and raise the price of silk, it makes no sense that even these small fish and shrimp in Qingyuan Bafa have to be interrogated, and the officials and businessmen who are caught are enough to toss for a while. Can you even catch the stewardship? She slowly raised her hand to press her eyebrows, and although there was no evidence, she now dared to conclude that someone must be secretly investigating Yu Fangyan. Or rather, she was behind Yu Fangyan. How much did Yu Fangyan in the previous life make from this business, and whether she told Su Wenyi about it, Zhang Xuning didn't know. But she knew that since she dared to borrow Yinza money to do business, it must be because she knew the exact news in advance, so she dared to give it a go. Pushing backwards, it is reasonable that someone in the Qingyuan Bafa will be found out. Because Yu Fangyan had just passed through at that time, it was impossible for him to have any connections of his own to learn the news. Well, most of them learned by chance. Yu Fangyan in this life got this news from herself, but she did the same thing as Yu Fangyan in the previous life, and she may even have attracted the attention of others to this matter because of her kindness, so she caught the clues to check her. And it must have been all the people she came into contact with. Only then can we find out the person in charge of this steward. If this is the case, most of the people in charge are taking the blame for themselves. Yu Fangyan saw her expression change, and the uneasiness in her heart gradually grew, and she said worriedly, "Isn't it that someone is investigating this matter, and I am very likely to involve the girl?" Zhang Xuning exhaled softly. She sensed that someone was secretly watching her, but if someone took the blame for her, she might not have time to find out about herself. After all, who would have thought that a young lady like her, who had nothing to do with Kaohe, would know such news? It's a perverse thing. So even if her name is on the checklist, I'm afraid that it will be subconsciously ignored. Well, although the situation may seem a little tricky, it can still be remedied. Zhang Xuning said to her, "No matter what you want to do in the future, you must be careful in your actions. I haven't mentioned a word to that Boss Su before, and don't mention another word in the future. Especially my identity. I don't know if someone is following you when you come to me today. But whether you have it or not, you don't know about it, and I'm not the one who told you anything. I'm just a lifesaver you're thankful for. Tomorrow you go buy some things, and then sneak out of the mansion, go to the side gate of the Zhang mansion, and visit me quietly. I'm just going to have a few words to tell you. Yu Fangyan's face was solemn, revealing unprecedented seriousness. She nodded vigorously, but then frowned. If I come sneakily, won't it make others more suspicious? All they want is their suspicion. Jiang Xunning's eyes were covered with a little haze. Although she didn't know who the opponent in the secret was, she had to be extra careful, and also explained to Yu Fangyan, a wealth is not exposed. If you make money, it is really strange to buy things with fanfare to thank me as a life-saving benefactor. And you are also cautious in the bafo, and it seems to arouse suspicion when you come secretly, but you can investigate it carefully, which is the most suitable way for your situation. Yu Fangyan listened as if she understood it. Jiang Xuning smiled. If you want to dispel a person's doubts about you to the greatest extent one day, you must let him doubt you first, and then let him deny his doubts. Because people are used to doubting others, but they always believe in themselves. You must know that in the world, smart people hiding in the shadows are difficult to deal with. Yu Fangyan hung her head, thoughtful. Jiang Xuning then handed back the box containing the silver ticket and said, "You can take the money back." Yu Fang was stunned. "What I brought is for the girl. The money for doing business is given by you, and the way to make money is also what you said. Even my life was saved by you. If you don't accept this money, I. Her eyes were red and she was about to cry. Jiang Xuning only picked up a moon-white sachet pressed in the box, and said, "You knocked down someone else's stall last time, is this what it is?" On the moon-white background, peonies are embroidered with dark blue thread. There are also a few strands of dark gold mixed in it, which are pierced with gold thread one by one. The stitching is very chic. Yu Fangyan didn't expect that she would know that she was stupid and knocked down the stall that day. Her cheeks were red for a while, her hands were on her knees, and she was at a loss, and she snorted, "I just saw it on the way back from the trading house, and I felt that there was a sachet needle in it that was very special. I don't know anything. The first time I saw the girl, I knocked off and stained your sachet, so I wanted to embroider a better one for you." Jiang Xuning stared at the sachet in her hand and did not speak. Yu Fangyan rarely said what she was good at. Her eyes brightened up a little, and said, "I learned this embroidery method for a long time, and this piece of material was also the last time I saw a silkworm farmer in their Nangsun from Basu, saying that it was his own silk, and there was just a small amount left and gave it to me. I think this is my first time doing business, and I was taught by the second girl, so I happened to use it to embroider a sachet. Is it pretty? Good looking?" Jiang Xunning's heart was warm, and she almost burst into tears. She held the sachet in her hand, and said, "I don't need the money, but I accepted this sachet." Yu Fangyan raised her head, as if she wanted to say something, but Jiang Xuning stretched out her hand, hugged her in her arms, and said softly, "What you brought me today is more important than this money." Yu Fangyan was stunned. Jiang Xunning's embrace was warm, even gentle. Her voice floated like a dream, "Thank you, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I misunderstood you. Thank you very much, you told me, it turns out that I can." No one knew that she had already been on the verge of collapse several times that day. On this day, Xie Wei told her, "You can't escape." It was also on this day that Yu Fangyan told her, "You can change." Although the trajectory of many things in this life does not seem to deviate much from the previous life, everything is different from the previous life. Especially Yu Fangyan. She thought she had saved her, but this was still a cowardly and useless Yu Fangyan, the kind of disappointment in her, if not a disappointment in her that she couldn't change anything. But she did. And she did it. Even strictly speaking, it is more successful than Yu Fangyan in the previous life. Although she left some beginnings and ends, what did it matter compared to what she got today? Yu Fangyan didn't know why she was crying today, nor did she know what she meant by what she just said, but from this embrace, she felt an unprecedented softness. The box she had brought with her was put back into her hands. Zhang Xuning only said to her, "Come to me tomorrow." Yu Fangyan hugged the box, nodded stunnedly, got out of the car, couldn't help but look back at her, and then hid the box back in her sleeve and slowly walked down the long street. Zhang Xuning watched her walk away. Farther and farther away. In the end, he got out of the car and stood on the wheel outside, looking at her figure until he could no longer see her. Xiewei rolled up those answer sheets, and when he walked out of the palace along the Suzaku Long Street, he saw such a scene. The carriage stopped on the side of the road, and she stood on it and looked into the distance. In the rare clear sky of autumn, the sunset has been blown by the wind, and she is in this glow. When Zhang Xuning turned around to get back into the car, she suddenly saw him stopped not far away. It should have been scared. But maybe I was too happy to see Yu Fangyan like this today, and at this moment, I saw Xiewei, who should have a hateful face, and I felt a lot more pleasing to the eye. She curled her lips, bowed to him, and only said, "Mr. Xie is good." Xiewei did not respond. He only felt that the smile on her lips, as if it was this day, suddenly swept away all the haze on her body, and there was a rare sunny brightness. It's like today's sky. Zhang Xuning didn't need him to respond to anything, just said hello, and then got into the car, asked the coachman to start again, and went in the direction of Zhang Mansion. It's almost time for the palace gate to be under the key. Many ministers who were temporarily summoned to the palace also left the palace one after another. Seeing Xiewei standing over there in the middle of the road, he couldn't help but say, "What is young Master Xie looking at here?" Xiewei then withdrew his eyes and turned to look at the sky. Nearly in the evening, it is extraordinarily magnificent. At the top of the head was a clear deep blue, then to the west, and then to the west, to deep purple, then crimson, then to golden red, and then to the golden-edged darkness to the west. For some reason, he smiled and only replied to the adult, "It's so good on a good day."
Feng Yong Hao, Shao Wang Yu.
Chapter 34, Before the Storm. "Boss Lu, Mr. Xie is here." It was dark, there were few pedestrians on the street, and most of the shops were closed, but on the second floor of a building facing the street, the lantern hanging outside the secluded pavilion was still on. In the dark room at the back, there are children's gifts. Lu Xian was sitting inside, looking at the results handed down below, and frowned dissatisfied. Hearing the voice, he scolded, "If you don't come early or late, please don't move the 8 sedan chairs on weekdays." As soon as I told him that there were a few pieces of good wood here, I came by myself, and I might as well have 2 broken pieces of wood with Lao Tzu. As he spoke, he slammed the secret report on the table with a snap. He got up and walked outside. There is a special piano room for guests to try the piano in the secluded pavilion, and when Lu Xian pushed the door open and entered, he saw that his little boy had already consciously put a charcoal stove in the house, and also made the best Baitan snow for Xiewei here. For a moment, his nose was crooked. Lu Xian walked over and poked his finger at the child's head. "How much does it cost for him to buy a piece of wood? You bring him a charcoal basin to make tea, what else do I earn from your boss? Can't you have a long brain?" The boy glanced at him quietly. "My own boss is just picking on his morality, and he can't change it." And when Mr. Xie came to drink bad tea, even if he didn't make it, the boss was afraid that he would make it by himself after a while. But he didn't refute anything, silently withdrew, and closed the door. Lu Xian glared angrily, Look at how many of these subordinates are unruly. Who is the master of this secluded pavilion? Xie Wei was sitting cross-legged on the luhan bed with a square table by the window at the moment. Because of the cold, he also had a thin velvet blanket on his legs, and only laughed lightly when he heard this. Lu Xian walked over and found that he was looking at something. More than a dozen sheets of rice paper full of words should have been rolled, and the two ends were still a little upturned, and they looked like answer sheets. What Xie Wei is looking at now is the one on his face, and when he looks at it, he can't help but bend a finger slightly, sticking it to his lips, and he actually laughs out loud. This dog crawls words. Lu Xian felt that his eyes hurt just by looking at it. He directly lifted the hem of his robe, sat opposite Xie Wei, and said with a strange expression, I heard that you entered the palace today to go to the examination school to choose a companion for the princess. Won't these be the answers of those young ladies of the family? Xie Wei didn't answer this. Only the other 11 answer sheets below were pulled out, and as soon as they were loosened, they were thrown into the charcoal basin and burned. He didn't care much about the appearance, so he left the one he had just seen, rolled it up and received it aside. Only then did he raise his eyebrows slightly and said, You have a good catalpa here. If you don't open your mouth, you will choke to death when you open your mouth. If it weren't for the fact that he was doing something for this person right now, Lu Xian dared to guarantee that a person like Xie Wei would be beaten to death by him when he went out. I only bless him in my heart. It's best to cut Zhang Qin for 3 or 5 years, and then be slashed by someone. At that moment, he coldly pulled the corners of his lips and said, There are good catalpa woods, but I have 2 bad news here. Which one do you want to listen to first? Xie Wei sighed softly, I'm still obsessed with that Yu Fangyan. I knew that I would have called Jianshu to help fetch wood. Why bother making your own trip? Lu Xian couldn't hear the name, and when he heard it, he exploded, and there was an evil fire in his heart, and he always felt that he was being played with. You explain it and let them investigate. But after checking it out for several days, what are the results? As early as when he learned that Su Wenyi had hoarded raw silk and did not sell it, Lu Xian felt that this Yu Fangyan had a ghost. And there is a mysterious owner behind it. If he doesn't find out the owner, he is like a cat scratching in his heart. After all, he is an old fox who is good at business and cares, but he went to buy a raw silk and was taken first, but the other party confirmed that the raw silk would definitely rise, and he was almost so angry that he vomited a mouthful of blood. This kind of thing, Lu Xian must not bear it. A few days ago, he and Xie settled down in a direction, and felt that this matter was inseparable from the people on the Cao Yun and Cao River, so he asked people to investigate the people Yu Fangyan had recently come into contact with. After the first check, I replied that there was no suspicious person. Lu Xian was so angry that he called people over and scolded them, and asked them to carefully check those people again, and the scope was expanded to the people who were indirectly connected by the entire Yu mansion. At the same time, Xie Wei sent a letter to the emperor that the price of silk in Chenming, Jingzhong, and Jiangnan had been maliciously depressed, so as to thoroughly investigate the people in the officialdom who were related to this matter. This time I really found out the results. There were indeed officials and businessmen on the Cao River who joined forces. First the merchants maliciously lowered the price of silk, and then caused people to overturn the silk boats transporting raw silk on the Grand Canal, so that the supply exceeded the demand, and the price of silk naturally skyrocketed. After the profits, the officials and businessmen will each divide half. After the matter was revealed, a large group of officials and businessmen were naturally investigated. But on the side of Yufo, it was found out that a steward was related to a servant who ran errands for an official's house on the Cao River, and he had indeed heard the news beforehand, and he had inadvertently confided in it when he was drinking in Yufo. Everyone thought he was joking, and didn't take it seriously. No one really took this opportunity to buy any raw silk and hoard it and wait for the price to rise, even the person in charge didn't take it seriously. Xiejuan, this matter is really unreasonable. Lu Xian tapped the square table with his finger and emphasized to Xie Wei, assuming that Yu Fengyan is indeed destined for luck and dares to gamble, and learned the news that the price of silk will rise from this steward, so she went to buy raw silk, but is it necessary for her to make up a proprietor that does not exist in the first place? The existence of this proprietor will not help her in any way. So the only explanation is that this owner does exist, but we haven't figured out where he's hiding. Xie Wei also lowered his eyes and pondered. Lu Xian became more and more depressed the more he spoke. This person acts paradoxically, he knows the news, but he only takes out 400 taels to buy raw silk. He may not dare to do it, but he may also have no money. Either that, behind this incident, there is a deep meaning that we can't guess. The things that can be seen through are not terrible, but the things that cannot be seen through make me very uneasy. Xie Wei said, if you feel that finding out a steward is not enough to dispel your suspicions, then send someone to chant with Yu Fang for a while. Su Wenai's raw silk has only been sold for 2 days, and the money is still hot when it arrives. If you really have an owner, you must go to the owner to settle an account, right? At that time, you can know whether this owner exists or not, and if so, who it is. What Lu Xian wanted was what he said. Immediately laughed, stroked his palms and said, then you have to send a few good hands to watch. It is best to ask Dayakan to go in person, in case the owner is also a powerful character. Don't lose your wife and break the army. Xie Wei said, Dayakan may not be willing to go. Stop talking nonsense, what's the bad news? Lu Xian stared at him at this time, his eyes flashing. Xie Wei picked up the teacup, put his slender fingers on the rainy azure glaze, stopped, and suddenly realized something. It has something to do with the Yanji Marquis mansion. Lu Xian nodded, knowing that here in Xie Wei, everything related to the Yanji Marquis mansion was a major event. Although he still doesn't understand why. At this moment, he pondered for a moment before he spoke. Recently, the king of Pingnan was arrested in Beijing against the party, and there were several assassinations of court officials. The emperor was obviously enraged, and the criminal department and Jin Yiwei were investigating this matter together, and they were still fighting inside, to see who opened the door for these anti-parties in Beijing first. The family is panicking, everyone is afraid of finding out about their body, even if it has nothing to do with the thief. They are afraid that they will be found out by the Jinyi guard. It can be said that everyone avoids Jin Yiwei. But guess what? Yan Shizi has received 100 households in brocade clothes, named Zhou Yinzi, who is active for him, and wants to top the shortage of the 1,000 households vacated by Zhang Sha's impeachment. Today is almost decided, and tomorrow it will rise. Jin Yiwei. Xie Wei had been in the palace all day, and he didn't know what was going on outside. As soon as he heard Lu Xian's words, his 2 clear and long eyebrows suddenly wrinkled, and his good-looking face was suddenly covered with a sense of slaughter. He's scary when he's not smiling. Only asked in a deep voice, the Yanji home mansion is extremely upright, and he has never touched the brocade clothes and guards. How could Yan Lin promote this Zhou Yinzi? Lu Yan also felt very strange when he knew about this, so he deliberately inquired, and then looked at Xie Wei and said, this week, Yan Ji was originally working for Zhang Shilang of the household department, but he was a servant of Zhang Mansion, and later sat in the Jin Yiwei 100 households. Some people guessed that Yan Shizi was entrusted by the future Yu family, and some people said that this person was recommended to Yan Shizi by the second girl Zhang Xuning. Xie Wei's gaze fell on the rolled-up answer sheet, remembering what he said to her in Fengshan Hall today. His eyes were a little emotional. He slowly closed his eyes, thinking about something. Lu Xian said, this timing, this coincidence, Jin Yiwei, Yan Ji Haofo, Pingnan Wang's old case, things can't be simpler. Asterisk. When Zhang Xuning returned to Jiang's mansion, it was also late. Obviously, the news that she passed the etiquette and examination school, and was finally selected as the princess's companion, had already reached the mansion, and she got off the bus from outside the mansion gate and walked to the mansion, and everyone she saw along the way was respectful to her, and she couldn't wait to smile 10 faces on one face. That attitude was very different from before she entered the palace. If it weren't for the fact that he had been deeply impressed by the white eyes and contempt of these people in the mansion for 2 lifetimes, I was afraid that even Zhang Xuning wouldn't have dared to believe the 2 faces of these people who had changed so much before and after. It can be seen from this that it is such an honorable thing to be able to read for the princess and get the blue eyes of the nobles in the palace. Zhang Boyu and Meng Shi hadn't slept yet, and they both knew that Zhang Xuning would come home today, so they waited. Zhang Xuning went to greet the 2 of them when she returned home. Obviously, the 2 of them actually didn't have much hope for Zhang Xuning, especially when they heard that Xie Wei would have to preside over the school examination when they entered the palace. So when I learned that she actually passed the examination school, I couldn't tell the surprise in my heart. Originally prepared a basket of words to comfort her not to be sad after losing the election, but it was all useless at this time, and she was already a little rusty with her daughter, and she didn't know what to say, so she could only praise her for doing a good job, which could be regarded as winning glory for the family, and in addition to that, she could only hurry back to the house to rest. Zhang Xuning was disgusted with the matter of entering the palace, and listened to the congratulations all the way, but she was tired of it to the extreme, and when she heard them tell her to go back to rest, she got up expressionlessly, and said politely, "That daughter retires." After saying that, he withdrew. As soon as he went from the room to the corridor, he heard the dissatisfied voice of Meng Shi behind him, "Look at the choice of a companion to read, there is no one in your eyes like this." Zhang Xunning's footsteps stopped for a moment, and the fingers hanging by his side clenched. But after standing for a moment, she walked away. Tang Er and Lianer, who were following her, listened to Fang Cai's Meng clan's voice in their ears, and at this moment, they followed Zhang Xuning step by step, and they didn't dare to say a word. Just walking, Tang Er Lianer found that she was going in the wrong direction. Isn't that the way to the big girl's house? The 2 of them had a hunch that something was going to happen. The second girl is used to being arrogant, and she was not soft at all when she bullied the eldest girl in the past, but there was no action during this time. Is this about to relapse again? The 2 glanced at each other, wanting to stop it, but when they thought of Zhang Xunning's temper in the past, they didn't dare any more. It didn't take long for her to arrive outside Zhang Suiwai's house. The maid who came out with the water was startled when she saw her, and almost threw the copper basin to the ground. Her face was pale, and she shouted tremblingly, "Second Miss Zhang So." Zhang Xuning glanced at her and walked in directly through the door. Zhang Suiwai in the house has finished washing, untied the bun that was curled up during the day, her long black hair was scattered on her shoulders, and she didn't apply powder on her face. Even when he saw her come in, he only frowned slightly. She said, looking at the bad posture of this comber, "It must be that my mother is angry with you again, so you have to come and give me anger." Zhang Xuning smiled, "I'm just going to take a step into your house, she has to be diaphragm for a long time, don't give you anger, she will be angry by herself. Who told me that I was the daughter raised by my aunt, and I learned to be frivolous and pickled with my aunt? 2 days ago, I was hit on the door by the head, and I actually thought that I wanted to be kind to others, get by, and not toss with her. But today, I suddenly figured out that people live in the world, and happiness is the most important thing. There are so many unhappy things outside, and I have to be angry when I go home, and this life is inevitably too hard. In the future, whoever calls me unhappy, I must find a way to make this person even more unhappy. So, although you don't ask, I'll tell you about Wanyang tonight, how about it? Chapter 35, Revenge. Zhang Suiwei looked at her quietly, a pair of dark eyes seemed to hide a little sigh, and after a long time, she said, "You've been waiting for me to ask, right?" Zhang Suining didn't seem to hear it, but directly instructed the maid in her house, "Mayor, why don't you go and bring me some tea?" Mayor was so angry that she couldn't speak. However, Zhang Suiwei actually said, "Go to the end." Mayor was stunned for a moment, and called directly, "Big girl." Zhang Suiwei ignored it. Mayor then held her breath and glanced at Zhang Suiwei viciously before turning around and going out to serve tea. Zhang Suining smiled, "My sister is really good-tempered." Zhang Suiwei only said, "After all, losing your temper can't let you get out of me. Then there is no difference between a good temper and a bad temper." This is really what Zhang Suiwei can say. She was like that in her previous life. Bullied by her, but still able to maintain a dignified and decent appearance, as if nothing was enough to make her angry. But if a person lives in the world, if he doesn't have a temper at all, then he really doesn't look like a real person. Zhang Suining listened to her words, and only walked around her room, looking at the delicate beechwood stepping bed, the carved lacquer and the dresses that had just been incense. She also has these things. But Zhang Suiwei was given by Meng, and hers was obtained by herself. You really don't look like Wan Niang's daughter at all. Zhang Suining gently picked up the bracelet made of red agate that she had put on her makeup. For as long as I can remember, Wan Niang is a very temperamental person. We were living in a village in the countryside, and because we were kicked out of the house, a lot of people bullied us and said some gossip. I'm scared. But she would come out of the house, stand under the eaves, laugh and curse back. Zhang Suiwei closed her eyes slightly. But Zhang Suining's voice kept ringing in her ears, "You can't believe it, right? Even in such poor mountains and bad waters, she always dresses herself up beautifully, even if she uses the worst quality fat powder. She could settle accounts, she could read, she could recite poetry, she could swear, and she didn't talk to the village women, because she never thought of herself as someone like them. Even when other people's children came to play with me, she wouldn't allow them. She told me that I was not the child of a peasant woman in the countryside and that I was different from everyone else. At that time, Wan Niang was the most different, beautiful, and powerful woman I could ever meet." Zhang Suiwei has always lived in this prosperous capital. She had never seen life in the countryside, nor could she imagine the rude appearance of the village husband and peasant woman there, let alone what it was like for a woman to stand under the eaves and laugh and scold people. Chinese costumes and food, piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting. That's what she's familiar with. And everything Zhang Suining told was strange to her. "When I was a child, I played in the yard, catching dragonflies, folding peach blossoms, and Wan Niang would occasionally sit on the steps under the eaves and watch me, and sometimes stand behind that small window to watch me. At that time, I only thought that Wan Niang's posture and appearance were really good looking, and when I was a little older, I could feel that the way she looked at me was actually very different, always in a trance, as if she had thought of something else." When she said this, Zhang Suining's voice suddenly became a little mocking, and a smile appeared at the corner of her lips, as if this could suppress a faint astringency in her heart. "Others say that Wan Niang is the concubine of a big family, and I am the concubine of a big family. In short, it came from a big family. I thought, Wan Niang maybe wants to go back to the capital. So one day, when Wan Yang looked at me with such eyes again, I ran in, took her hand and said that it didn't matter if the house didn't let her go back to the capital. One day, I will take her back and buy her the best rouge and clothes so that others can no longer bully us. It was clear that she was reborn, and this memory was a long, long time ago for her, and she thought that she had almost forgotten it. But when I really talked about it, I remembered it vividly. Jiang Xuning even remembered that Wan Niang combed 3 locks of bun that day, and hung an old red coral earring on her soft earlobe. When she looked back at me, she seemed moved. I am happy. But then, her eyes changed, and she pushed me away. Do you know what Wan Niang told me? Jiang Xuning put Jiang Suiwai's red coral bracelet on her slender wrist, lowered her eyes and admired it. She told me to get out, and she also said that I was a slut, and told me to go back alone if I wanted to go back to the capital. Her skin was very white, lined with red coral of excellent texture, like a sheet of snow. Jiang Suiwai felt shocked from this extreme color difference. This bracelet is good looking. It's a pity. Like Wan Niang, it doesn't belong to her. Jiang Xuning suddenly felt the coldness that had nowhere to put it, and laughed. Wan Niang used to be very good to me, I don't even know why she scolded me. I hugged myself aggrievedly, sat under the eaves and cried, thinking, maybe Wan Yang hated the capital, so she didn't want her if I went to the capital. How ridiculous, how pathetic. After staring at the bracelet for a long time, she still faded it. Then walked back to Jiang Suiwai's side, took her hand and put it on her, and her expression was gentle. It wasn't until 4 years ago that I knew my life experience, and when I thought back to everything in the past, I understood why she scolded me and why she looked at me like that. Jiang Suiwai slowly clenched her hand, only to feel that when the red coral bracelet was put on her wrist, it was like a string of soldering iron falling on her skin, making her voice finally tremble with a hint of concealment. Enough, don't talk about it anymore. Jiang Xuning continued as if she hadn't heard it, look, how unfair God is. Obviously, you and I have been replaced, so we should have everything that the other party should have, and if we have something, at least I should have a share. But on the contrary, Wan Niang knew that I was not her daughter, her real daughter was in the capital, but my biological mother happened to not know that you were not her daughter, and raised you as her own daughter, and poured more than 10 years of affection. So, not only did I not have the love of my biological mother, but I also didn't have the love of Wan Yang. You enjoy the love of the two of them, everything, but I have nothing. It was as if she heard the wind from the mountain trees blowing through her heart again, sweeping away everything and leaving nothing behind. Therefore I will have whatever you have, and I will rob whatever you have that is good. But there are things that I can't grab in my life. Wan Niang was thinking about her own daughter before she died. I was going to be jealous and crazy, but you disdain. Smack! Jiang Suiwai's face finally turned cold, and she suddenly got up, ripped off the bracelet she had worn on her wrist and threw it on the table, and asked, why should I care, why should I ask? You are jealous, that is what you can't get, but what you are jealous of may not be what I want. Jiang Xuning looked back at her. Jiang Suiwai's voice had a rare coldness. Wan Niang is my biological mother, but I have never seen her even once, let alone that she had bad intentions in the first place, and deliberately replaced you and me, which caused all the things that followed. All pity arises from hatefulness. Sister Ning, you are a willful person, but I can't. I was raised by my mother when I was a child, and I learned to protect myself. However, when I ask about Wan Niang, I am responsible for Wan Niang's kindness, and when I ask about Wan Niang, I am responsible for my mother's kindness. If I can't do both in any case, why should I put myself in a disadvantageous situation? And for more than 10 or 20 years, my mother has nurtured me carefully, and even though she is sorry for you, she is not sorry for me. How do you want me to be so ruthless as to hurt her? When she said this, she also showed a little sadness. He sat down again and said, I know that there is a chasm between you and your mother, but when you first returned home 4 years ago, your mother also wanted to make it up to you. But you always mention Wan Yang, and you don't obey discipline, poke her sore feet everywhere, that is, you have a lot of guilt, but you also make her think of Wan Yang from time to time. I have advised you, but you hate me, and you don't listen. There is no doubt that Zhang Suiwei is a smart person. But this kind of cleverness always makes Zhang Suining feel cold. In this world, not everyone can be the same as you, weighing the pros and cons of everything, and it is so cold that it is almost cold-blooded. Zhang Suiwei said, so you should hate me, and I will never retaliate against you. Zhang Suining couldn't hold back her laughter, as if she really knew her today. I think about it in my past and present lives. She looked at her and muttered in a trance, why didn't I find out before, you are the piece of material to be the queen. The voice was so low that it was like whispering. Zhang Suiwei didn't hear clearly. But this did not prevent her from issuing an eviction order. I have said so much today, I think my mother will also respond for a while. I have been suspicious of me for a while. You are happy, should you go? Zhang Suining said, it's time to go. After taking 2 steps out, she stopped and looked back at her with a deep gaze. I always see Wan Yang in my dreams at night. However, you haven't seen her, so you can't dream of it, right? After saying that, he smiled and turned to go out. Zhang Suiwei sat in the room, only looking at the string of red coral that had been scattered, and lowered her eyes and was silent. Asterisk. When Meng Shi got up early the next morning, he learned from the eldest maid who was waiting next to him that Zhang Suining had gone to Sister Hui's house to sit for a long time and talk for a long time last night, and he was so angry that he trembled and dropped all the teacups in the house. He also scolded a few times. She asked someone to call Zhang Suining to speak, but Zhang Suining didn't bother to take care of it. When I came back from the palace, I was indeed very tired, and I slept dreamless that night. When the people from Meng's side came, she was putting a hot face towel on her face. Hearing that Meng Shi called her, she only laughed, and her voice floated up with heat, vague, and fluttering. I want to entertain guests today, and I will make an appointment with Yan Shiza later. I'm afraid I won't have time to say hello to my mother. Just tell your mother, be polite to me in the future, and don't try to call me at every turn. Otherwise, I have my own ability to make the whole capital know what her beloved daughter is.